These are some pointers on how to find the best model to use on your own art workflow as an artist. They're aimed at artists who might be interested in using Krita AI Diffusion, and it elaborates a bit more on my previous videos. While this video is focused specifically on Krita AI Diffusion, these models should work on any other AI user interface. The overall points of this video are relatively simple and can be summarized in 3 steps. Number 1. Train your own model or download a good alternative. Number 2. Set up a style preset with it. Number 3. Use it in your workflow. However, there are a couple of important and more involved details to know for each of these steps. The first step is choosing the right model, which includes checkpoints and Loras and some embeddings too. From personal experience, for drawing, painting, and similar, the best model will be one trained on your own works. This is especially true if you already have a particular style or a specific way that you draw. One reason for this is because that model will generate images in your own style, which can save you time on getting started with your process. Another reason is that both Refine and especially Live mode will follow the way you draw pretty much perfectly. You can see this in my previous videos. This will help the AI act more like an autocomplete function, saving you time in the line art and coloring steps and the overall process. For these reasons, you can have much more control in your workflow. With other models, what you're drawing will naturally be different than what you'll see be completed, depending on the model used. It could also distract you from noticing any incoherent AI details that you still need to oversee and manually fix. Thus, with your own model, there's a stronger, quote, mental connection, if you will, between what you're making and what you're seeing on screen. Even if you intentionally want to experiment with a completely different style than your own, your model can still help. With your own Lora, for example, you can use it at lower strengths to blend it more with the base checkpoint and with other Loras too. By blending it this way, that mental connection can still partly remain. Here you can see an XYZ plot made in Automatic 1111 of how my Lora combines with different checkpoints at full strength and at half strength with this base sketch. It's easier and faster to illustrate this point this way, but it applies the same in Krita AI Diffusion. You can also see it combined with these Loras from some of my art influences with the same sketch. And more importantly, in Live mode, you can see how my Lora gets combined with all these same Loras. I can personally tell you that using AI only really became truly fun and rewarding after training and using my own models, especially Loras. However, if you're just starting, training a Lora can be a bit daunting. This is mostly due to the higher hardware requirements to train locally. There are online training services you can use if you don't meet the requirements, but that also involves other concerns like privacy, on top of paid fees. The process itself nowadays is much easier than before, but it's still relatively technical. I still recommend looking for proper Lora training guides here on YouTube. You can find some in the description. Without getting too technical, this is a brief and quick overview on the steps to train a Lora, using Koya's GUI, linked in the description. First off is making your dataset with your own images. A dataset is simply a bunch of images, paired with their respective text file, contained in a folder with this naming scheme. Number of repetitions is the repeated amount of times the training process will look at these images. The text files in the dataset simply contain the words that better describe the characteristics of their respective image. These words are called tags. You can see this example with this image. You can automate this tagging process directly in Koya's GUI. Once you have your dataset, it's mostly just a matter of pointing to the folders containing what is needed and setting a couple of options. For the base checkpoint to use, especially on a dataset consisting of drawings, I'd recommend one that has a neutral anime style, even if your style isn't anime. In the case of my latest Lora, I used Momiji Mix as the base checkpoint. This isn't set in stone and is most likely horribly wrong advice. However, it's given me the best results with my datasets, though it might not with yours. The rest of the options aren't that hard, as you can simply use the built-in presets. I used the SD 1.5 Lora Opti preset, and just changed the amount of steps and epochs. I used around 1300 to 1600 steps, and 3 to 4 epochs for mine. I also changed a couple of these options as you can see. Then it's a matter of waiting for the training to complete, and testing the resulting Lora. You can then tweak the settings again, if the results aren't what you expected. Again, on the surface, it is just as simple as modifying some settings, but I'd still classify it as medium technical difficulty. You can also use OneTrainer instead, which has an even simpler user interface, and training is reportedly faster. I highly recommend looking all this up in better tutorials, as training is its own deeper rabbit hole. It can also get a bit confusing at the start with all the different types of Loras like Loras, Loha, Loker, and others. In short, they're all Loras, and they all work in most stable diffusion user interfaces, but they learn differently, and some types are better for certain types of training. However, for style training, a standard Lora should be more than enough. Lastly, for this section of the video, even when training your own Lora, you will still need a checkpoint to apply it to. In most cases, the base checkpoint used to train that Lora will be the better one to use for it. As shown earlier, your Lora and Loras in general can also have different effects on different checkpoints. There are obvious differences, such as when applied to realism or 3D CGI checkpoints. But even between more, quote, neutral anime models, there can be noticeable differences. In my case, I use my own checkpoint merges of other checkpoints and Loras that my own Loras seem to apply the best to. You can use the Supermerger extension in Automatic 1111 to make these merges, and also merge them using Koya's GUI, though that also can be a bit technical. Thus, for beginners looking to start using AI in their art workflow, the second best option for checkpoints and Loras is downloading them from Civitai. This means the best model to download can be one that matches your current style the closest, one that matches the style you want to focus on, one that matches your artistic intention, and also one that Loras apply the best to. The main thing to know when searching for a model is that there are currently two major model architectures. One is called Stable Diffusion 1.5, also called SD 1.5 for short, and the other is called SDXL. You can identify these two types of architectures on a model's Civitai page by looking at its details chart on the right. The most important thing to know about these architectures is that SD 1.5 Loras and embeddings only work with SD 1.5 checkpoints, and that SDXL Loras and embeddings only work with SDXL checkpoints. You cannot interchange them. There's also a separate category called Pony. In short, it's still an SDXL checkpoint, but it's more, well, special. Don't worry too much about it. Overall, I recommend regular SD 1.5 and SDXL models. The main reason for this is that the style of Pony checkpoints tends to vary too much on their own without style Loras, though there are fine tunes that improve this. As will be explained with a bit more detail later, I'd value style consistency over what a model can be prompted into. But there's nothing stopping you from experimenting with Pony models. Eventually, maybe even by the time you watch this, a new architecture called SD3 might also be finally released. The same points should apply, though it usually takes a while to see new checkpoints and Loras for a new architecture. The second important thing to know is that SD 1.5 models are smaller and need less hardware resources to run than SDXL models. If your PC struggles with SDXL models, it might be better to stay with SD 1.5. There's also a bit more variety with SD 1.5 models, but SDXL is catching up. The third important thing is using the right VAE for the right checkpoint. This means an SD 1.5 VAE with an SD 1.5 checkpoint, and an SDXL VAE for SDXL checkpoints. To be brief, a VAE is the part of the denoising process that finishes turning noise into a proper image. You won't have to worry too much about them, since style presets make them easy to manage. More on VAEs in the next section of this video. Lastly, a pair of less important technical points, but still worth noting. SDXL models and newer models are better at handling higher resolutions, and can have better coherence in details and prompting. This still matters, but not as much with a manual refine process, and also with live mode, where ultimately you're the one in control of the detail and coherence. The Krita plugin itself is also very good at handling different resolutions, so it's not really a big issue. You can get by easily with just SD 1.5 checkpoints alone. Managing all these different architectures and their specifications is easy in general, thanks to style presets. You can simply make dedicated SD 1.5 and SDXL styles, and just switch the checkpoint from the dropdown. though I still recommend storing SD 1.5 and SDXL models separately in different respective folders. This will mainly help you avoid mixing SD 1.5 and SDXL Loras and embeddings, making them easier to identify and select. Knowing all this, you can then use Civitai's search function and filters to find the best model for you. Their example thumbnails are usually accurate to their style, and thus, what you can intend to make with them. You can download most models without an account, but you might need to make a throwaway account to view and download certain models, mostly due to spicy thumbnails more than anything else. Remember that Loras, Lycoris, and Doris are basically, quote, the same thing, as Civitai lists them and filters them separately. Note that checkpoints, Loras, embeddings, and VAEs all must go in their respective folders. These folders are found inside the models folder that's inside your respective Comfy UI folder. They're all named accordingly. It's important to keep track of which type of model you are downloading, because all these models will have the same file extension, so you can identify them accordingly by type and place them in their respective folders. Speaking of file extensions, before downloading any model, what you absolutely need to know is to always download models in SafeTensor's format. Most models on Civitai are already in this format, so it's not a big issue. However, if the model isn't in SafeTensor's format and is instead in CKPT format, don't download it. In short, CKPT are very easy to exploit, as they're just zip files. This means they can be opened, and you can insert all sorts of code exploits, basically turning them into viruses. They're this insecure because, back in early 2022, and even before, models were kept in research labs only. They became much wider spread by the end of 2022. Meanwhile, SafeTensors just contain the necessary machine learning weights, numbers, and math, and are much harder to exploit. Keep in mind that pretty much every file format in history has been exploited at one point, even text files. That said, SafeTensors are still much safer than CKPT. If you still don't quite find the right checkpoint or Loras, you can also combine multiple Loras at different strengths. You already saw how my own Lora combined with other Loras. Here you can also see how these Loras combine on their own, to make unique style variations. Of course, you should totally only do this with general styles, and never ever with other artist styles, even for more understandable reasons like just basic curiosity, or learning how your art influences are actually reflected in your own style. Don't do this, ever. Most checkpoints also recognize basic artistic style and medium variations by just prompting. For example, most checkpoints know what traditional media, painting, pencil drawing, watercolors, acrylics, and sketch means, amongst others. However, dedicated Loras for these general mediums and styles can also help reinforce and improve them. You can see a couple of traditional media Loras here. Remember, the point of all of this is not to outright copy another style, but to match your own style and the way you draw as close as possible. In general, I recommend at least one neutral anime checkpoint to apply Loras to, a realism-centered checkpoint for image editing work, and a 3D CGI checkpoint for rendering assistance with 3D work. Of course, how many checkpoints and Loras you'll download and keep will depend on the ones you will actually use. It will also depend on how much storage space you have on your PC, and how much data you like to hoard. This is also me telling you to stop using the same 2 or 3 generic models that everyone uses, when there are so many different styles.
This is not asking. This is a threat.
But seriously, if you want to use them, there's nothing wrong with it, aside from them maybe not quite fitting your own style. There are also some special checkpoints called Turbo, Lightning, and Hyper. All of them are about the same in concept and execution, though I'd recommend Lightning or Hyper over Turbo. What makes them special is that they need less steps, as little as just 1 step in some cases, to make a decent image. At 4 to 8 steps, they can make images that are about as good as other regular checkpoints that need 20 to 40 steps. You can also download special Loras and add them to your prompt to turn any checkpoint into a Lightning or Hyper checkpoint. You can find them in the description. There is a special preset you can use with these in Krita AI Diffusion, which will be explained in the next section. They work especially well with live mode. Due to them needing less steps, you can get much closer to real-time feedback with them, even on slower video cards. Finally, as the last but not least important consideration for choosing the best models, I'd recommend style consistency over prompt coherence. Prompt coherence is still important, especially so the AI can know what you are meaning to draw and relate it to the prompt, and thus can complete your drawing more accurately. However, you're ultimately the one who can just manually fix inconsistencies, though good coherence will still save you more time. This is especially more important when you start off from a base generation, instead of starting from a sketch, or when using live mode. The checkpoints and Loras you chose might have the right style, but might not quite be giving you the right image you want to start off with, due to their lower coherence. In that case, you can also just use a different model that is more accurate, or even DALL-E 3, to generate your base image. Then you can refine that image with the models that you will be working with, which will change your image to your intended style, and then work up from there. Here, you can see this checkpoint, and these Loras I picked, that matched my own style the closest, without using my own Lora. Even though they don't quite exactly match my style as well as my Lora does, they're close enough. Thus, the best models to use are ultimately up to you, depending on your own style and considerations. And also on how well they actually do follow your art process, which you can only find out by using them and experimenting with them. Which leads into the next point. Now that you have your own models, or downloaded the right ones, the next step is configuring the right settings for them. You can set them up easily with Krita AI Diffusion style presets, and just change them from the drop-down as needed. For VAEs, I recommend always setting up a specific VAE, instead of setting checkpoint default. Technically, all checkpoints have VAEs, but setting a specific one means that exact one will be used instead. This is better, because some checkpoints have baked-in VAEs that aren't good, especially a certain leaked one. I recommend the following specific VAEs. You can find them all linked in the description. All these can be used for any types of images, either in 2D, 3D, and realism, but each is a bit better for certain applications and intentions. First off, here are some SD 1.5 VAEs. This is the VAE provided by Civitai AI for SD 1.5. It's good for general use, but a bit more optimal for realism and 3D. For 2D, which includes regular drawings, paintings, and anime, there's the Waifu Diffusion VAE. It tends to be a bit more colorful too. There's also this VAE called ZVAE, which is good at providing sharper results. The downside is it tends to remove texture, if you do want to keep it. It can also be a bit too sharp and can make your images look like you used unsharp mask too much. There's also this VAE called Custom VAE Q6B. It can give a sort of hand-painted look, but can also mangle smaller details. There are some other VAEs on Civitai you can experiment with, but these 4 should be more than enough. However, there's a certain VAE from a certain leaked model that you should avoid. It's usually called Anime VAE, but also gets passed around and renamed with multiple different names. Names like Anything VAE, Abyss Orange Mix VAE, and many others, but it's still the same, broken VAE. It tends to give random black images due to it being broken. Other VAEs don't have this issue, so I highly recommend avoiding it. Though there's also nothing stopping you from finding out. For SDXL, there are mostly only 2 options currently. The first is the fixed SDXL VAE. It helps avoid black square generation errors, and also some weird watermarks that the non-fixed VAE can have. There's also this VAE called XL VAE. It tends to be brighter and more colorful, though it might be too much for you. For clip skip, I recommend leaving it as is. However, there are some models that necessarily need it set to 2. If a model is giving you artifacts or glitches, then you might need to change it. To be brief, clip skip can help with prompt coherence and accuracy due to how word relations were learned during training and then stored in various data layers inside a model. In practice, it's basically another option to make different image variations, adding to extra randomization, which you can control with manual work. I recommend enabling SAG, as it can help with general pixel quality, though it will be a bit slower. You can also set your Loras here. This is useful for your own Lora, for example, to just set it and forget it for that particular style preset. You can also specify their strength here. Note that this isn't the only way to add Loras. You can also insert Loras directly into a prompt with this format on screen. The strength number here can be changed from 1 to a lower decimal. The default of 1 will apply a Lora at 100%, or quote, full strength. Setting it to 0.50 will apply it at half strength. You can tweak this decimal to better blend Loras with the base checkpoint and between other Loras. Lowering a Lora's strength can also help if a Lora is overbaked and produces artifacts at full strength of 1. You can also increase it above 1, however it will definitely overbake the higher the strength. Krita AI Diffusion can also autocomplete a Lora's name as soon as you finish typing less than Lora, colon. Next, you can set your quote quality-related positive and negative prompts here. This is also a whole rabbit hole in itself. To keep it mostly short, models can recognize certain prompts that can increase image quality due to how they're trained. Setting them in a positive prompt will tell the model, denoise something like this, and in a negative will tell it, avoid denoising into something like this. For these, there's a higher chance that, if you can look up a quality concept in most search engines, and find corresponding images, then a checkpoint most likely knows these concepts, and thus these quality-related prompts might actually work as intended. Other models are trained to intentionally recognize specific quality-related tags, like best quality, masterpiece, or score 9. This is due to how datasets can be structured, splitting them by raw pixel quality in different subfolders, and tagging them as such. Thus, these prompts mostly only work in those specific models trained that way, or in checkpoint merges that contain these specific learned weights. Other more esoteric quality prompts can also work due to sheer chance, due to how learning works, and how tokens work. Tokens are the numbers that regular words are converted into, and are used to do the math that determines how noise pixels should be denoised. Thus, a random word can get tokenized into a number that by chance taps into a neural connection related to image quality. That can lead to better denoising and thus a quality increase. Or a word can also just not correlate to anything meaningful and can have little to no effect. Some people swear by shorter quality prompts, others by long schizo prompts, others by no prompts at all. My recommendation is, if it works for you, it works. You can also just go full gamer mode and fill a negative prompt with slurs, and they'll probably still work. There are also embeddings you can place into a negative prompt called negative embeddings. These are trained on purpose on low-quality images tagged with low-quality concepts, and thus the theory is that placing them in a negative prompt will avoid those concepts better. In practice, they can mostly work as expected, and sometimes even noticeably help. Though some can change a style a bit more than you might like. To use them in Krita AI Diffusion, you can use this simple format on screen, embedding, colon, and the file name of that embedding, without its file extension. Here you can see a couple of examples using my quality prompts, and others not using any quality prompt at all. In the case of my Lora, there is definitely some sort of noticeable change. One might have more of that mean soul. So, yeah. I leave the experimentation up to you. The last step to set up a style preset is setting up the samplers by just selecting one of the sampler presets from the drop-down. All these work for any type of model architecture, both SD 1.5 and SDXL, except a specific one which will be noted in a bit. The quality preset will be used for the regular generate function and also for the refine function. And the performance preset will be used for live mode. This means you can have a more detailed but a bit slower sampler for generate and refine, and a much faster sampler for live mode, but also a bit less detailed. For generate and refine, you can use any of the first 4 sampler presets, as they'll mostly just amount to different randomization for generate mode. For refine mode, that randomization doesn't matter as much, though some of these samplers can be better for smaller details, like the sampler and the creative preset. For live mode, you have a couple of more technical options. The turbo/lightning merge preset and the lightning merge preset are good for those specific types of checkpoints, but also work for regular non-lightning checkpoints. Overall, I'd recommend lightning merge for live mode, but you can experiment with other presets. There are also 2 specific real-time presets, LCM and lightning. Note that both of these presets need their respective Loras present in your own comfy UI Lora folder, or they will give you an error and won't work. By default, the Krita AI Diffusion plugin's install process should download the LCM Loras, but it might not download the Lightning Lora, so you will need to manually download it. The links for both these Loras are in the description. Rename them as mentioned there too, and place them in the Lora folder. LCM works for both SD 1.5 and SDXL. However, This specific Lightning preset only works for SDXL. Similar to Lightning but using a somewhat older and different method, LCM can also generate images faster with less steps. LCM is pretty fast, but it tends to flatten colors and shading and remove a bit of detail and also make the line art thicker, at least on my models. Of course, this might be a good thing if you do want this effect. Meanwhile, Lightning tends to preserve details better and keeps them a bit closer to what you would get with the regular refine function. You can also make your own sampler presets by clicking the Edit Custom Presets text. This will open up Notepad where you'll have to manually add them. You'll have to follow their specific code format. You can find this in the description, alongside all the options you can use. For example, I added this Lightning old preset that an older version of the plugin used, and I found gives me better results in live mode. It's basically the same as the current Lightning merge preset, but uses regular Euler instead of Euler ancestral. For a more detailed explanation on samplers and schedulers, I recommend looking them up in the Stable Diffusion art website, also in the description. Note that you will have to restart Krita for these custom presets to appear once you've added them. Finally, for the last settings to change, I recommend setting live new seed after apply to on, to avoid over-sharpening in artifacts when reusing the same seed, as mentioned on my past video. Here you can see this sharpening effect, and how it gets worse every time a result is sent to canvas. This is due to the same noise guidance pattern being applied, and thus those specific pixels get more pronounced and sharpened due to the denoising process. This seed randomization is on by default for refine mode, and also generate mode, so you don't have to worry about them. I also recommend enabling Show Negative Prompt here, and increasing the prompt line count. After having explained all of these important concepts and settings, you can finally just use your selected models in your art workflow. There's not much else to explain here that wasn't shown on my last videos. Your prompt is one of the few things left to explain. You can start from a really basic prompt, especially when using live mode, and then start adding more details as you imagine them, plan them, or draw them. For example, your starting prompt can just be one girl or monster. Then you can add other details to the prompt, like hair type, hair color, clothes, expressions, background details, and whatever corresponds to your artistic vision as you go along. You can also not use any prompt at all, though I still recommend at least one very basic overall concept as a prompt. Though it's also interesting to experiment without a prompt and see what the AI does by itself. You really don't need fancy prompts. None of that meme prompt engineering, just type the elements that you want your image to have as you go. The closest thing to prompt engineering that you might need is increasing or decreasing a word's strength by using this format. Just add a colon and a number and decimals after the word, and enclose them in parentheses. It's similar to decreasing and increasing a Lora's strength. Note that this is not a way to tell a model, do this with more quality, but rather it just tells it, pay more attention to this specific part of the prompt. So if you aren't quite getting the results you want, this is a way to tell a model that you really want it to denoise your drawing that way. Though don't go above 1.2, or you will deep fry your image. So only really do it if a specific detail is being stubborn, and not for every single prompt. You can also use negative prompts to avoid details that the AI might be giving you and that you might not want. For example, if refine or live mode is giving your catgirl human ears, then adding ears, human ears, visible ears, or something similar to the negative prompt might help. A regular or positive prompt is simply what you want to see, and a negative prompt is what you don't want to see. Another pro tip to keep in mind is that you can go back and forth between refine and live mode. If live mode and its sampler isn't giving you the level of detail you want after a certain point of your process, then it might be better to switch to refine. If you want to add whatever bigger details you might need, but want to have the feedback that live mode gives you, then you can simply switch back to it. Finally, another very important point to remember is that you are using Krita after all. This means you have all its tools at your disposal that can get enhanced by both the refine function and by live mode. Tools such as the selection tools. You can select a specific part of your image and just refine that if the rest of your image is already where you want it to be. This is what's commonly known as inpainting. Inpainting in most other stable diffusion interfaces is basically just a masking method, except here you have much better tools to do it. Another important point to remember in relation to Krita is that you don't have to rely on AI to do everything. For example, to turn an image into grayscale, you could add grayscale to your prompt, add a control net, and refine. Or you could simply do this. If you want to give your one girl a beauty mark, then you could add beauty mark to your prompt, select a part of her face, and refine. Or you could simply do this. Of course, there are many ways in which AI will still substantially help, compared to doing it the manual way. For example, it could indeed be easier to change colors by just changing them in the prompt. Or you could also do this using blending mode layers like color mode to do it with more control. You can also generate stuff separately, and then composite everything together. Or add text, and also refine it. Or do regular image editing work that you would do in Photoshop, but without paying for. Sky's the limit.
This is where the cream of the artist and graphic designer crop will rise to the top. Ooh, yeah.
You don't really need a lot of the fancy coherence and detail extensions you can find in other user interfaces, when you can just do what they do manually, and let the refine button even it out. Trust in the refine button.
Trust in the refine button.
Trust in the refining button. And in live mode too. That's it. Hopefully this very long video was helpful in some way. Thanks for watching.